Pierre McGuire, NBC's World Hockey Canada's greatest play-by-play or
polarizing figure.
I mean, so speaking of it's a shame. I mean, I don't want to speak too soon because you never know. The Canadian North Division might come back, but it would be so amazing if it came back in the same year that the Oilers have acquired Duncan Keith and the Ottawa Senators have picked up Pierre McGuire as their senior vice president of player development. Like, that would be, speaking of like just failing upwards, like the Canucks just doing nothing and somehow by default just becoming the third best team in the league because they didn't do stupid shit like this. All of the, like the Oilers thing where all the interviews surrounding the deal for Duncan Keith, like just like made you shake your head and go like, oh my God, like hockey men are just so stupid. Same thing applied to the hiring of Pierre McGuire by Pierre Dorions, who said it was a no-brainer to bring Pierre McGuire into his head office. And there was some amazing tweet where it was like in the media availability, Pierre Dorions had said that Pierre McGuire has a dearth of intelligence on all players. It was like they screen capped like the Webster's Dictionary definition of dearth and we're like, I don't think this is the word you were hoping to use. I think you meant breadth, which is just a perfect sign of what you want to see in a team.
Trying to really pick a big one. Trying to pick the big words.
It's
being like, you could have just said, you could have said vast. You just could have said vast. That's
you could have just said a lot of knowledge, but no, you chose a word that made it sound like Pierre McGuire doesn't know fucking anything, which remains to be seen. He hasn't been an executive for like 20 years, like since the 90s.
I will say this. If I ever needed to know who played it for St. Cloud State at some point in my life, and some point in their college career, Pierre McGuire would be the person I'd go for that information. Like, because he just has it in there. He's just a walking encyclopedia of former junior and former places of junior and what coaches and players they've played with and like and those things. If I'm looking for that, I either go to Google or I just wait for Pierre McGuire to tell me.
Okay, so you know what's amazing is like I have like a ton of knowledge on like movies and movie trivia because that's like all I used to do growing up was just cruising IMDb and like basically just reading everything about movies. It is completely useless information that you can imagine, like just tie in when someone brings up an actor and you can be like, oh, well, so-and-so did this and that.
And sometimes it'll help you on trivia night. Like, there you go.
You never know.
Yeah.
But only in the NHL world can you get like a 6-figure executive position by having pub trivia as your bread and butter.
That's the wild part, is it might even be more. Because think about it. U.S. broadcast money is a lot.
Yeah.
So there is a very good chance the Senators might have paid closer to 7 to get them. Which would be I wouldn't
be shocked.
I have to hope they didn't, because that would be just wild. If they had. But like, so here's the thing, right? One of the big things, like Ian Mendez from The Athletic did a big in-depth piece on everything on the whole Pierre McGuire hiring and everything. It's a great read. You should go check it out. Ian's a great writer. He's been covering the Senators for a very long time. And he talked about how really a lot of this. So here's the thing, right? Is Pierre Dorions was not actually really all that involved up until recently in this whole hiring process. That was relatively recently. The guy who hired him was Eugene Melnick.
Oh, good.
Literally, here's the thing. I feel so poor Ottawa Senators fans. Like, good Lord, those guys get kicked in the teeth all the damn time.
I know. Just when things are going right with their prospect pool and you're like, oh, the young kids are going to carry the way. Guess who they hire as the young prospect development guy? It's Pierre McGuire.
They hire Pierre McGuire. One of the biggest things about the Senators, on this show all the time, we talk about ownership a lot because we talk about the Aquilinis, what they're doing. We are often quite critical of what they do and their decision making. Yeah. And I believe that's fair. Like, I don't think there's anybody who's above criticism, like when it comes to what's going on when it comes to your hockey team. But then you have guys like Eugene Melnick who make what the Aquilinis do on a daily basis look very minor in concern when it comes to just some of the things they do. Like, when you hear from Eugene Melnick at any point, the Senators are in for a bad time. Like, something's about to go horribly wrong. And what happened this year? Like, the whole team completely punches above their weight class, plays some of the best hockey, was one of the best teams in the second half of the season, ends up finishing 5th, I think, in the division, or 6th. Yeah. Like, I believe they finished above Calgary. Like, they weren't going to make the playoffs, but they played the team bought in and played as if they were. Like, they played as if they expected.
They played
to go
like
they
far. Had something to prove, and they're like, we're not a bunch of scrubs. Like, we're actually gonna, try and win.
They played their best. They played their absolute best, and they won a bunch of games against a bunch of much better teams. And one of the things that was kind of noticeably absent was the fact that you didn't hear from Eugene Melnick a lot last year, and that seemed to be good because he is somebody who famously gets too involved in hockey ops decisions, and when he does, it goes south very quickly. Now
cue the video of him interviewing Mark Borowitzki.
Yes,
in the locker room with an old jersey.
Exactly. And even like I watched a little bit of the Pierre McGuire press conference. Yeah. Immediately, I'm just like, this is a man. Like, I'm already just grimacing because I'm watching. This is a man who's been on broadcast television for the last 20 years, and here he is doing a press conference with his phone in vertical camera mode. Like, that might seem like look, that might seem like I'm nitpicking. That might seem very minor, but that's a big deal. Like, that should tell you something. The fact that this is a guy who has literally been in a broadcast job for the last 20 years and didn't make the effort to have his phone turned horizontally properly so it would fill a screen. Like, that to me, or like that, again, it seems small, but that matters. Like, that tells you what you need to know about, this is probably a guy who's a little past his prime. It probably isn't necessarily a guy you should be hiring to run your billion-dollar hockey team. Like,
not even that, but like to be charged with developing kids that are like a third of his age. Mm-hmm. Like, what does he know about development right now with kids born in 2002?
Yeah,
2003.
What does he have how can he relate to a group of players that are 2 generations ahead of him? Like,
and it's interesting because I think it was the Ian Mendez piece where he asked all the former Hartford players, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it sucked playing for him because no one in the league respected him. They didn't respect his decisions. Yes. They didn't respect his coaching. They didn't respect him at all. And it's like anyone that went to Hartford just loathed it. Yeah. So it's like, how are they supposed to feel about like that kind of guy being in charge with like your prospects development curves? Like, really?
Right. I pulled that article up and I read it, and it is, if you haven't read it, it is fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll preface it by saying that, like, we have enough questions to ask about Pierre McGuire's abilities with what he does today that maybe judging him based on what he did 20 years ago as an executive is a little unfair. And it's been long enough that I think most people,
you kind of deserve like a reset, I guess. Maybe you've changed your approach or something.
Everyone evolves over time. No person, if you have not changed as a person in the last 20 years time, that's bad. That's not good. Every person should show growth within over time of 20 years as a human being, right? Yeah. So that wouldn't be that, and I think that's fair. But it is worth, when you go into some of the stuff that he did and tie it into kind of some of the things that have come out with him recently, it does kind of tell you a broader picture of this is like of why this is not exactly setting up for success. Like one of the ones that I found very funny. One of the funniest parts of this was this is in 1994. This is after he was fired from the Whalers job after 1 year on the job. Many times he privately said after a game how he outcoached the other guy. But it was something never really made public until May 3rd of 94, when McGuire proclaimed that no coach in the NHL can outwit me. That quote ran in the hockey news and raised eyebrows all over the NHL. And then once, when he was an assistant coach, McGuire bragged about his strategy to shut down Mario Lemieux. This was after a 7-3 loss and 4 goals by Kevin Stevens. That's important. That kind of tells you all you need to know.
That's important.
Like the fact that at one point this was a guy who thought he was literally the best coach in the NHL, despite never having held a head coaching position of any kind. And then you tie that fact that he thinks he knows all with stuff more recently. Like what was one of the most recent things that Pierre McGuire had a headline for was when he talked about how analytics are basically a bunch of nonsense, right?
Yeah, and because you can't measure heart.
You can't measure heart. And then he proceeded to use examples of how analytics are bad by referencing the Oilers, who we just talked about. And who are very clearly not a team doing a lot of great analytical work necessarily.
And then he referenced scouting too.
And then he referenced the Leafs was the other team he mentioned, who like a little bit closer, but still this was right after they had spent a trade deadline buying a bunch of non-analytics darlings for grit and meat and potatoes.
For the exact purposes that would employ Pierre McGuire, that he should objectively like, but he didn't like. It was all just like a bunch of straw man arguments. Like he came in like knowing people were going to be like, hey, notorious idiot probably has issues with analytics. Let's ask him about analytics. And instead of just being like, yeah, I'm open to it, I just don't understand it because I'm an elderly man. He just straight up got defensive and put out a bunch of straw man arguments. Like what was it today? He's like, I
think he referenced Blake Coleman.
He mentioned a bunch of players and teams. And he was like, for scouting, you need boots on the ground. That's what I believe in. And it was like no one was saying that.
No one was saying it's either
takes
or.
Away. No one was ever saying analytics takes away the eye test on scouting. It's just a means of enhancing your view or like the whole picture of a prospect you're scouting. That's all it is. No one ever,
no one has ever been like, you need to, it's either you go and scout at games or you
trust a computer.
Trust a computer. No, it's both.
No one ever said these things.
And you add more tools to your repertoire because at the end of the day, more tools, like why would you reject more tools that could potentially make you a better team? Yeah. Like that's the thing. And then he referenced specific players on the Lightning as proof of why grit and heart matter and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but all of those guys you just mentioned are also highly regarded in the analytics community for their ability to put the puck in the net and what they contribute away from their points and their points. And
usually heart and determination and battle level, all these things you can't compete. Usually that results in really positive analytics because they're a direct result of hard work. Very rarely do people bust their ass and just get crushed at it unless they're really bad players that shouldn't be in the NHL.
I have a lot of heart. Should I be in the NHL?
Yeah.
I probably
probably not.
Just as much heart about hockey as some people in the NHL. Does that make me NHL caliber talent? No, that's not how that works. And then there was the other thing that he referenced. I think the funniest one he mentioned as well, in this conference was I think it's the 7 player model, and this was something Ian Mendez asked him specifically about because it's something he's mentioned a lot on the radio before. This whole thing basically was surrounded this idea that McGuire's idea of how to build a successful hockey team centers around the 7-player profile, and that a championship roster. This is a direct quote from the Athletic article. It's McGuire's belief that a championship roster must contain the following 7 players: 2 dominant centermen, a power forward, a specialist forward, either on power play, penalty kill, or face-off, an elite puck-moving defenseman, an elite shutdown defenseman, and an elite goaltender. And it's like, so having a lot of good hockey players wins you championships. Oh my, like, revolutionary thinking. Write that down.
That I want the analytics that say those are good things.
Here, like, just plops the entire stack of every analytics, like, chart ever. Sure, here you go. They all say these are important. Like, shocking. And then I think he said something along the lines of there were like 3 players away from that, and it was like, I think you're maybe a little farther. You're getting close. Sure, that might be a little closer to true, but the Senators are still a long ways off from that, because again, as many teams have proven, you can't win on 2 or 3 guys. That's not enough. Like, 7 players will make you a decent team. It might get you into the playoffs, but it's not. You're not going to win anything just on those guys alone. You need a supporting cast to center them around.
Look at the Vancouver Canucks. They had those 7 players, but outside of that, they had nothing, and therefore they got destroyed in the one round. They needed more than just those 7.
Yeah, and
funny how that works.
And on the flip side of that, look at some of the Canucks teams that have done well and gone to the finals. Like, those teams had those 7 players, maybe. Like, you could, if you want to go through the list. But then they also had they had every bottom 6 defense forward and their depth defenseman and their backup goaltender. Like, you need those just as much. You can't rely on a few guys to get the job done. So, I mean, like, as far as Ottawa is concerned, are you at all worried that they're about to undo a lot of the stuff a lot of the success they've had, or is it going to be a little too hard for him to really say, if he turns out the way we expect him to, is it going to be too hard for him to really do any damage?
It depends, right? Because we've heard things where they've said, like, Pierre McGuire is going to have like a much greater role than just director of player development. Like, he's going to be in on everything, which, I mean, it's tough to say because the Ottawa model, like, since they sold off everything, has been pretty much just built through the draft, get a bunch of young guys in, and like start there. And so, like, I think they've done a really good job. Like, I think Pierre Dorions actually done like a pretty decent job of flipping all the expensive pieces away and dealing with a very cheap owner and kind of following what the owner wants and doing what you should be doing to rebuild a team. But the McGuire hire, which I hate as a rhyme, that's obnoxious.
The McGuire. Oh, I can't. That's so bad.
Yeah, I don't know, like, what kind of impact he's really going to have. Like, I'm assuming Pierre Dorion obviously, like, drives the bus, and Pierre McGuire probably has his inputs. Mm-hmm. It would just be very interesting because Pierre McGuire has some, like, very interesting, like, things to say about certain players that are, like, completely baffling, and like his player evaluations, like, during game calls, were always like very, like, what player are you watching kind of reactions.
Right.
So it'll be interesting, like, how that meshes with a team that's obviously put a pretty big emphasis on just kind of throwing the youth into the deep end and being like, all right, like, if you can do it, you can do it. And if you can't, then, oh, well, go to Belleville and ply your trade for a bit. Like, they're very much a trust the kids and trust the process kind of thing. So it's very interesting to, like, go with a guy who is very bold and brash with, like, not only his opinions, but even in his time in Hartford was very bold and brash with the way he used his players and the way he coached. So it's kind of like a weird clash, but like you said earlier, maybe he's changed his ways in the last 20 years. He's a new man for all I know.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to square the dot of, like, a guy being out of the executive positions for close to 25 years, suddenly being put into a senior executive role when it comes to prospect development, which is just very strange all in all.
Yeah. I did want to ask you specifically, as somebody who spends, the majority of his time covering AHL hockey and covering the development efforts of the Canucks.
Yeah.
How what kind of an impact and what kind of an effect do you think having McGuire as the head of player development will have on Belleville? Because it said he's supposed to have he's going to have a lot of input on what goes on with the AHL team. So does it worry you at all about how that team is going to develop talent from that point of view?
Yeah, like it just depends, right? Because the Belleville system really has been like, you get a player in, you put him into a top 6 position if he's a forward, or a top pairing, like a D pairing position, and if he starts scoring or producing really well, we're going to give him AHL games as soon as possible because they're really local, so it's really easy. I find it hard to believe that Pierre McGuire is going to be the type that's like, oh no, you have to have veterans and kids need to earn their time, because that's kind of the Canucks approach. Is you're not spoon fed anything. You need to earn the top roles. You need to earn the top line position. You don't just get thrown to the wolves. I'm kind of in favor of the throw to the wolves approach because I think it tells you more faster about a player and what you can expect and what they need to expect of themselves heading into subsequent seasons. I can't imagine Pierre's going to get an NHL position and genuinely concern himself that much with the AHL side of things, because their AHL side is not the problem.
Right.
It's the NHL. They made a bunch of calls on some players that haven't really worked out. They've drafted very well. It's just playing the waiting game, which for a brand new executive in the NHL, I can't imagine he'd come in his first year and be like, okay, your development system isn't fast enough. Your NHL team sucks, so we're going to do a bunch of crazy shit to become playoffs again. Yeah, like I can't imagine any executive would be like, oh yeah, let's listen to this guy. He clearly has the right idea. Like, because I think if you came in with that kind of attitude, everyone would look at you and be like, no, bro, like we have a plan.
Yeah.
Like chill.
I mean, if you want to talk about planning, the one other thing that's worth noting about this whole situation as well is the fact that like Pierre Dorions was talking about the fact that, he'll answer to me. I'm still in charge here kind of thing. But hey, his contract's up in 2022 and so at the end of next season, it's up. And Eugene Melnick was the one who hired Pierre McGuire. Are we looking at a situation?
We're looking at a situation where McGuire is
Pierre McGuire next year. Yeah, like is he the heir apparent? Because Dorion doesn't have a contract right now. He doesn't have an extension on the table or of any sort. Like
that's a good question, but honestly, the biggest takeaway from this thing is like even if Dorion's out and McGuire's in, the best thing that comes of this, of course, is that Pierre McGuire is off of TV broadcasts. So
yes,
if he's in a head office ruining a team, a franchise as a director of player development or as a GM, it doesn't matter because he's not ruining play-by-plays with interjections on every great moment because he just wants to hear himself talk and ruin everything. I have not forgotten about that Jordan Eberle call. I don't think any Canadian has.
No.
We will not forget. The North remembers.
Somebody made a version of that call where they took Pierre McGuire out.
It's probably amazing.
And it's fantastic. But specifically, I will say, I think the part about it wasn't even the fact that McGuire was out. It's the fact that whoever did it made it so seamless. Like it sounded totally natural. Yeah, it was so funny. I was like, wow, that sounds perfect.
The original call is just the guy going, "Can you believe it?" And instead of letting the crowd just like take away the audience, it's Pierre McGuire interjecting like almost to spite him and be like, "I can!" And it's like
and then goes on some weird, very anti-Russian thing.
Yeah,
it was just so cringe, and there are many cringy moments in Pierre McGuire's broadcasting career. Enough to fill a book, but right now we don't have to worry about that anymore because as far as the foreseeable future is concerned, he is not going to be on TV. So that's what a shame.
Producer, cue up Good Riddance.